Welcome back, everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into something that's not getting enough global attention: the silent collapse of Britain's economy. While the world focuses on the US-China rivalry, a quiet storm is brewing across the Atlantic. And if you look closely, you'll see that the UK, once the center of global finance and industrial power, is now standing on shaky ground. This isn't just another recession story, it's a tale of decades of poor policy decisions, over-reliance on debt, collapsing productivity, and political paralysis, all converging at once. Let's unpack what's really happening in Britain, why the economic situation is so dire, and why the government has no good choices left. Framing the crisis: debt, weak growth, and paralysis. While Washington and Beijing battle it out over tariffs, technology, and geopolitical dominance, it's America's closest allies who are paying the steepest price, and at the top of that list stands the United Kingdom. The truth is, Britain was never in a strong position to begin with. Productivity has been stagnating for years, economic growth is crawling, and the budget deficit has exploded beyond recognition. Like most developed nations, Britain has been running its economy on the fumes of borrowed money. But unlike the US, the UK doesn't have the privilege of owning the world's reserve currency. That means Britain can't simply print its way out of a crisis without unleashing massive inflation. It's trapped, and the numbers prove it. Over the past 20 years, the UK's debt-to-GDP ratio has skyrocketed by a jaw-dropping. That's faster than the United States itself, and that should terrify anyone paying attention. Let's be clear, America can get away with reckless spending because the world still demands dollars. But Britain, not so much. The British pound is no longer the global powerhouse it once was, and that's exactly why the government has run out of tricks. Chancellor Rachel Reeves faces an impossible task: how to fund public spending without sparking investor panic. The only real tool left: taxes. But here's where the nightmare begins. Raising taxes sounds simple enough on paper. Politicians always promise that the rich will pay more. But in practice, it doesn't work that way. The wealthy don't just sit and take the hit, they move. According to a recent UBS wealth report, nearly 500,000 millionaires are expected to leave the UK by 2028. Some may lose wealth, sure, but most will simply pack up and take their money elsewhere. And when capital leaves a country, it rarely comes back. That means less consumption, fewer investments, and a shrinking tax base. Exactly the opposite of what Reeves is trying to achieve. Even China, yes, the same China under sanctions and economic pressure, is expected to create more millionaires than the UK over the next few years. That alone should be a wake-up call. A fiscal crisis decades in the making. If you thought this started in 2024 or 2025, think again. Britain's economic implosion has been building for years. Remember the 2022 Liz Truss mini-budget disaster? The UK tried to boost growth through massive tax cuts, without figuring out where the money would come from. The result? The bond market revolted, the pound collapsed, mortgage rates soared, and within weeks the entire government fell apart. Fast forward to early 2025, and history repeated itself. Government bonds, or gilts, started collapsing again amid concerns about spending and sluggish growth. Investors have been spooked ever since. Now the Treasury barely has room to increase spending by £10 billion, a fraction of what's needed. The moment Britain tries to borrow more, investors could dump bonds again, sending yields through the roof and interest payments spiraling out of control. So, what's left? Raise taxes. Again. The fiscal black hole opens before Britain. Estimates suggest the UK's budget shortfall, the so-called fiscal black hole, is at least £30 billion, possibly far more. That's not something you can fix with a quick tweak. Britain is trapped in what economists call a fiscal doom loop. You can't borrow without spiking interest rates. You can't cut spending without tanking the economy, and you can't raise taxes without strangling growth. Whichever move you make, something breaks. If Reeves goes through with a broad-based tax increase, say a 1% rise in the income tax rate for all workers, she might raise an extra £8 billion per year. But that's not new money for infrastructure or innovation. It's just plugging holes in the budget. Productivity won't rise, investment won't flow, and the British economy will keep sinking into stagnation. The IMF's forecasts are brutally clear. Over the next decade, Britain's average GDP growth is projected at just 1.1%, the lowest in over a century. Combine that with rising taxes, high energy costs, and fading global competitiveness, and you get an economic time bomb waiting to explode. The pound could come under renewed pressure, investor confidence could crumble, and eventually, Either the government collapses, or the Bank of England is forced to step in with another round of money printing. But that would ignite inflation all over again, the very problem the UK barely contained in the first place. This is what economists call policy paralysis, when every option leads to pain. The export collapse, revenues shrinking abroad. Here's another problem: trade. If Britain can't raise enough money at home, it needs to earn it abroad. But exports are crumbling too. Sales to the US have fallen to a 3-year low, dropping by 900 million in just 1 month. Exports to the EU, once Britain's biggest market, are down 5.3%. That's no coincidence. It's the fallout of Trump's new tariff war, combined with Brexit's long shadow. The EU has pivoted toward cheaper Chinese goods, and British exporters simply can't compete. With trade shrinking and debt mounting, the UK's once proud economy is now running on fumes. The storm spreads beyond Britain to G7 economies. But it's not just the UK. The rot is spreading across the G7. In the United States, a stealth financial crisis is unfolding. Remember the panic over commercial real estate? It's back, and and worse than before. Mortgage-backed securities tied to office buildings now have delinquency rates of nearly 12%, higher than during the 2008 financial crash. Unlike the banking crisis of 2023, this time the risk sits with pension funds and investors, and as defaults rise, those investors could lose billions. It's not systemic yet, but it's a serious liquidity risk. When confidence evaporates, funding dries up, lenders stop lending, borrowers can't refinance. The entire financial system tightens like a noose. Even AAA-rated bondholders are taking hits. In one recent case, a mall's distressed debt wiped out over $230 million in investor value, including $72 million lost on supposedly safe bonds. If this trend continues, it could spark another global credit freeze. Europe's desperation grows amid supply and energy strains. Meanwhile, the EU is acting out of desperation. In a bizarre twist, Brussels now wants to pressure Beijing to guarantee supplies of critical minerals like gallium and lithium, even proposing that Chinese exporters include rare earths alongside electric vehicles shipped to Europe. That's right. The EU wants China to ship minerals with the products. It sounds absurd because it is. This move just exposes how weak Europe's bargaining power has become. High energy costs, heavy regulation, and lack of domestic mining have left the continent utterly dependent on China for the materials it needs to power its green future. If Beijing decides to turn off the tap, European industries would grind to a halt overnight. Germany already has to subsidize its industries into 2026 just to keep them alive. And the irony? Europe had another option. If it hadn't burned bridges with Russia, it could have sourced rare earths and critical materials from there. But geopolitics got in the way. Now the EU finds itself begging China while maintaining a hostile tone, labeling Beijing as a decisive enabler of Russia's war and calling for restrictions on technology transfers. It's self-sabotage on a grand scale. The bigger picture: connected global failures. So, let's put this together. Britain is trapped in a debt spiral. The US is drowning in commercial real estate defaults. Europe is contorting itself to stay alive amid energy shocks and trade isolation. These aren't isolated events. They're symptoms of the same disease: decades of reckless globalization, overconsumption, and financial engineering. The global economy is cracking at the seams, and the G7's old playbook doesn't work anymore. Britain is just the first major warning light flashing red. So what do you think? Can Starmer and Reeves somehow steer Britain out of this disaster, or is the UK destined for a long, painful economic winter? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and before you go, if you found this breakdown insightful, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into global economic shifts. Stay sharp, stay informed, and as always, thanks for watching. Explore more videos and subscribe for future deep dives.